that you are keeping an eye on as we're going through these next few weeks into the end of the year?
One of the things that obviously the headline inflation numbers are always important, but also look at some of the underlying inflation numbers in things like the ISM manufacturing or the ISM services index. That ISM services index has a prices paid component, and it came out this week, and that was higher again. So this is something that you're seeing in those service inflation numbers, and that's a concern for us. So we look at some of those underlying inflation indicators. The other ones are consumer inflation expectations. And we saw today that the one-year consumer inflation expectations jumped up again. This is concerning for us as well from an inflation standpoint. I think that's what the Fed's going to be looking at as they try and assess what to do next year.
So how does that look? How does that, I don't know, look at when you see the incoming administration? And we talked a lot about this week with Jay Powell, and what we heard from Jay Powell earlier this week. But if you do have an administration that comes in and ends up following through with what it talked about on the campaign trail, including deporting millions of people who are here undocumented, and also implementing tariffs, do you see the inflation picture changing?
I think there's upside risk there to inflation from a tariff perspective, and the estimates really range broadly for what that may be. And let's see what he comes in with when he actually does come into office and what those tariffs may look like. We have a kind of a playbook of what happened in 2017 and 18, and we didn't see a very big impact from those tariffs in inflation. But we are in a very different inflation regime now than we were back when President Trump's first term. So it's the Fed's walking a very fine line, and they can't control that from the government standpoint. So I think it puts some upside risk there to inflation.
Hey, Megan, before we let you go, you get new cash right now. How are you deploying it? Just 30 seconds.
I'm looking at municipal bonds going into next year from a taxable equivalent yield perspective. They're attractive. And I think that you'll see, even with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that's expected to sunset, I think we're not looking for much lower taxes here anytime soon, especially with the deficit situation. So I think that municipals have a good opportunity right now.
All right, Megan Horniman, Chief Investment Officer over at Verdance Capital Advisors, joining us from Hunt Valley, Maryland this afternoon. Megan, always good to check in. Have a great weekend. Looks like the market's going to have a stock market, if you're long this market, it's going to have a pretty good week. The NASDAQ up a whopping 3.2% this week, while the S&P 500 up 0.9% this week. Coming up next, we count you down to the close. This is Bloomberg.
listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenivek. That is Nora Melinda, Bloomberg News equities reporter, in for Carol Masser this afternoon. Nora, it's Friday afternoon. I'm looking for some fun stories to talk about.
Okay.
There aren't that many of them, I'll be honest.
Not too many.
Let's talk about milk.
I'm here. I'm lactose intolerant, but let's talk about it.
All right. So the reason why we're talking about this, though, is because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wants to come in. He's talked a lot about the perceived benefits, the benefits that he says exist with raw milk, non-pasteurized milk. Some states do not allow it. Some states do allow it. You can get in trouble for actually selling it in some states. The concern is that if you do not pasteurize milk, there are harmful bacteria in there that could make you sick.
Understandable.
And it's kind of what's happening right now. The U.S. will begin testing raw milk supplies across the country for the presence of the highly pathogenic bird flu virus that's been spreading in dairy cattle.
Wow. I mean, I think this is really interesting, especially as we're thinking about people going raw milk in the first place is very interesting for me as a lactose intolerant individual. But imagine catching the bird flu.
Not good.
Not good at all. Not good at all.
So a federal order requires the collection of samples to be shared with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the agency said in a statement today. The move comes as the outbreak of deadly bird flu has hit poultry and dairy farms across the country, most recently spreading in California, which is the top dairy state. More than 700 herds have been affected by the bird flu during the outbreak, including about 500 in California. More than 50 people in the U.S. have tested positive, according to the USDA and the CDC. Raw Farm LLC's retail raw milk products in California were recently recalled after state testing detected the bird flu virus at the company's facilities.
Wow. I'm seeing it says that California farms are roiled by 40% of the U.S.'s bird flu cases in cows.
Yeah, so pretty substantial there. I think folks are talking about this in the context of what happens during the next administration. If you do, if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is confirmed as Secretary of HHS, the departments that he doesn't oversee will include the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So the purview of response to situations such as these will come under his purview. In this, we'll see what happens during the confirmation process. Certainly there are some other members of the incoming administration, potential members that have been tapped that are going through what seems like will be a tougher confirmation fight. So we'll see what happens come January. In this case, before we get to January, farms and other players in the milk supply chain, including transporters and processing plants, will be required to share samples on request. The first round of testing at silos at dairy processing facilities under this federal order is scheduled to begin testing the week of December 16th.
And it says that the federal health officials have said that the overall risk of an infection to the general public still does remain low and that commercial pasteurized milk supply is safe. There
it is, the commercial pasteurized milk supply.
That's the key part of the sentence.
Yeah, if you're getting your milk from sources that are pasteurized, then you don't have to worry about
then
this.
It makes sense.
But in your case, you're lactose intolerant, so you're good. You don't
I still cheat. I still cheat.
Okay, good.
Cry about it later.
Lactaid? Does that work?
So I just tried that.
I don't want to get too personal here.
You're fueling,
Okay.
I like to have some ice cream, I like to try all of the things, but I did actually just come across the lactaid pills this week.
Okay.
Actually last week during Thanksgiving. I love it.
Great. So
problem solved.
Problem solved. There it is.
It's almost like we invented something for this.
Enjoy some ice cream this weekend. Please. A life without ice cream. I can't imagine. Hey, let's take a look at what markets are doing as we do get a couple minutes away from the close here. The Dow is down about 0.3%. The S&P 500 up more than 0.2%. Taking a deeper look in the S&P 500 at those industry groups, consumer discretionary, communication services, information technology, and financials are all in the green today. We are seeing energy lag today, along with utilities, healthcare, consumer staples, and industrials. If we look at energy companies, we're seeing energy equipment and services down about 2.7%. In just a few minutes, we are going to be ringing the closing bell, or listening to those folks ringing the closing bell down at the New York Stock Exchange. Coming up next, we are joined by our Bloomberg TV team for our cross-platform coverage on radio, TV, YouTube, and on Bloomberg Originals. We're going to count you down to the close. Bloomberg's The Closing Bell starts right now.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close, starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic here with Alex Steele. We're taking you through that closing bell with a global simulcast that starts right now. We're joined in the TV studio by Scarlett Fu, as always, Tim Stenovic in the radio booth, Nora Melinda filling in for Carol Massar today as we welcome our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms. Here on what looks to be another record-setting day, Tim Stenovic, 3 straight weeks of gains for the S&P 500, and it looks like it's going to be, I'm told, a 57th record high.
Yeah, I heard that somewhere as well. 57th record high. I'm looking at other record highs too, including Meta Platforms. We can't stop talking about TikTok over here. I'm not a big TikToker.
Yeah.
Romaine, are you a big TikToker?
I thought we renamed that to Bloomberg Originals.
That's such an inside joke.
Nice inside joke. We did used to have a TikTok here. That was
the other TikTok. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the other
Go
TikTok.
Yeah.
The one that could be, January 19th, no longer be allowed here.
No, we don't do TikTok here.
See, I'm using it.
Nora does.
I do. Thank you, Alex.
Nora's the one who's been telling me about TikTok, guys,
Yeah.
to be fair.
I know all the deets.
All right.
Yeah.
What are the deets? Are you actually going to be able to use TikTok on January 20th?
I surely hope so.
Okay. All right.
I have a TikTok account. I haven't checked it in a while, but, that's for another day. What's interesting about this market high is that it's not accompanied by a whole lot of volume. It just feels like a lot of people are sleeping until the new year, until January 20th, honestly, until we get some new catalysts, because until then, it's a whole lot of uncertainty.
Yes, it is a lot of uncertainty, which is interesting, though, why you still see the Russell 2000 doing well, even though the mid caps have not. So that's interesting to take into effect there.
All right, let's walk you through the numbers here because it was an interesting week for the markets. And to Scarlett's point, too, we should point out volume of roughly about 10 to 15% below where it would normally be over the past 20 days here. A Dow Jones Industrial Average right across the screen there, down more than 100 points, or roughly about 0.3%. It's also lower on the week as well by 0.6%. The S&P 500, 6,089 or 990 as these numbers, of course, take time to settle, but that's going to be good enough for a record high, up 15 points or about 0.2% on the day and about 1% roughly over the 5-day stretch. The NASDAQ composite higher by 159 points or 0.8%, a 3% gain on the week, but the Russell 2000 kind of sitting this one out. Green on the screen for the day, 0.5%, but on a weekly basis, it's down 1.3%.
All right, well, let's take a deeper dive into the S&P 500. We did have 205 stocks move higher today. 295 stocks move lower, so showing that those stocks that did advance were those larger market cap names.
Yeah, and the larger market cap names are also the growthier parts of the market as well. Look at the IMAP here, and it shows you that consumer discretionary up 2.4%, communication services gaining 1.4%, and tech just barely positive, but it is still a gain of 0.1%. Growthy parts of the market gaining ground. The weak parts of the market, energy, utilities, and healthcare.
All right, let's take a look at some of the stocks that did move higher on the day today. Back to this idea of TikTok being banned. Bad news for TikTok, good news for Meta Platforms. Meta Platforms closing at a new record, higher today by more than 2%. Shares of Meta surging after that U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington refused to block that law requiring TikTok's China-based owner to sell the app or face a U.S. ban, 2.4% to the upside. Today, closing at $623.77. Look, the next stop is the Supreme Court. We'll see what happens if the Supreme Court does indeed hear this. We also saw shares of Alphabet, Snap, and Pinterest rise on this news. Let's talk Lululemon because shares posted their best one-day gain in 6 years, higher by 16% today. This after the company edged up its full-year outlook. Strong sales overseas, a sign that the company is spending off those upstart competitors, navigating slower growth in consumer spending. And finally, shares of Asana having their best day ever today. Shares just surging. This after the company provide third quarter revenue that beat estimates, a sign that the business is stabilizing, according to analysts. Look at that, up by 43.5%. Nora.
Can I throw an honorable mention, too? I thought the rebound that we saw in DocuSign today was pretty phenomenal. I think it closed higher by more than 20% on the day, Tim.
I only get 3, Romaine.
Oh,
So
I know.
I appreciate
But, you know,
the
Carol
honorable
usually
mention.
cheats.
doing what he
like
can.
6 or
Yeah.
something. So,
I'm a rule follower here,
I know.
guys.
I like that.
I get 3.
Same, Tim. All right, Nora, what do you got?
Well, so let's look at some of the names in the red here. I'm keeping an eye on Cooper Companies. Now, this is actually the maker of contact lenses, but they also do some different providing sources for different gynecologists and medical companies here as well. But we're seeing shares down about 4.3% at the close, and this is coming after it reported a 2025 forecast that disappointed expectations. But I did want to keep an eye also on some of those healthcare names that we saw falling. Of course, we know United Healthcare. We did see United Health Group, ticker UNH, falling, led a decline for many of these health insurance companies after, of course, that news that we had when they had their investor day, and as well as the shooting of the head of their insurance department. But those are some of the names that I'm looking at, as well as DraftKings. I mean, this is also a company that I'm keeping an eye on because of its Flutter, which is a parent company, actually fell after senators are seeking an FTC probe. So something to keep an eye on in this space.
All right, I'm taking a look. Yeah.
I just want to just point out to it, just another decliner. We kind of missed this. AMD took a big leg down towards the close here. There was a report out on Business Insider about Amazon expressing some concerns about not enough demand for the company's latest AI chips. And remember, it kind of has that partnership with AMD, and that's the feed through there. Those shares ended the day down 2%.
You have 2 honorable mentions?
Yeah, two honorable mentions.
That's something. All right, bless you, Scarlett. Bless you again. I'm taking a look at the bond market here because we had sort of a rally pretty much the second the jobs data number came out at 8:30. Obviously, it was centered in the front end. You get the 2-year yield down by 5 basis points. I do want to point out that we got a lot of Fed speak today as well. Then the blackout period starts, and it was a little bit mixed. Like Michelle Bowman talking about lower rates cautiously and gradually. You also had Beth Hammock saying the same thing. They're near or at a point where it makes sense to slow down those rate cuts. And Mary Daly saying she also believes in gradualism. Goolsbee, a different story, a little bit more dovish, but it was an interesting read through today.
I don't understand though how this sort of all fits in though, right? Because if you look at what we saw in the market and the repricing in a lot of the swaps market here, everyone still thinks we're getting a ton of rate cuts now and through 2025.
I think they're just airing all the possibilities as we wait for more data when it comes down to it, right? Next week you have CPI on Wednesday and then PPI on Thursday. That'll give a little bit more direction as to what the Fed does on December 18th. And then, of course, it's the outlook for rate cuts and unemployment for 2025. That's really going to set the tone.
I guess I'm surprised a lot of people aren't talking more about the unknowns that you have with the incoming administration. If he does go through with the tariffs that he's announced, if he does end up going through with deporting millions of Americans and what potentially inflationary aspects that could bring, what that does to rates.
But I feel like, isn't this kind of a repeat, though, of what we saw in 2016? I mean, people talk about that Trump rally, but they kind of forget most of that rally occurred before he was ever actually inaugurated. It was sort of like, okay, you know, we're euphoric, we all bake it in right now, and then, of course, once you started to see those policies, that's when you saw maybe a little bit of a consolidation in the market.
Yeah, remember all the volatility around the implementation of those China tariffs?
Yeah, absolutely.
But those are there now, and they're still there. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
are you
we'll
stocking
see.
up? You know, people are hoarding things, Tim, now.
I heard they're hoarding toilet paper.
Toilet paper, so we learned.
Wait, toilet paper though?
Yeah.
That's the one that you're going to stock
happening
up on ahead of tariffs?
But also, it's interesting too. We saw it in the UMich as well. I was talking to Joanne Shu, who leads the UMich data on radio earlier, and she was saying that people are buying durable goods now because they're worried about higher prices later. I mean, she didn't make the line for tariffs, but one can draw a conclusion, and that the expectation for inflation is also higher because of that.
That's certainly what a lot of manufacturers are pushing too. I mean, they're out there kind of marketing this idea, like get it now before prices go up next year, because you never know.
Have I told you guys about the driverless car that I took in San Francisco a few weeks ago?
There's a segue here, right?
Yeah, this is the segue. I'm just changing the subject. I took a Waymo, and I don't know if I'm surprised I haven't told you because I'm just talking to everyone about it. It was awesome. I took it at night in the rain.
Yeah.
Totally cool. I recommend everybody try this stuff.
Wait, you were going from point A to point B, or this was kind of just like an
I
experiment?
went point A to point B. I downloaded the app and just did it.
Was it cheap?
Oh, yeah, it was $29. It was like the same price that an Uber would cost to do it.
I'll take it.
I didn't know this, but our own Ellen Hewitt, who we're going to be speaking to a little later today, apparently in San Francisco, some folks are attacking these self-driving cars. They've been smashed. They've been lit on fire.
They're getting lots of hate.
Well, they are like a symbol of the apocalypse, right?
I guess. They're so kind, though. You get in and the music's playing. They're clean.
Did you give it 5 stars?
I did give it 5 stars. There is a rating system, too. It's just like Uber or Lyft.
Is it like
it's not
talk
creepy.
to you? How can it be kind? I don't get it.
It's a very welcoming environment.
Okay.
But there's no one to welcome you.
They're alone?
No, there's not, but your initials are on the top of the car.
So that makes you feel welcome.
It's made me feel welcome.
Well,
It was nice.
I'm going to segue to something else because
Okay.
Tokyo, the city of Tokyo, the
Feeling
government
welcome.
of Tokyo is trying to make female employees there feel more welcome. They're introducing a 4-day work week to help boost fertility rates and support working women, knowing that, having to balance work and parenthood is very difficult for a lot of people, and they really need to get their fertility rate up. It's at a record low of 1.2, which is far below the replacement rate needed globally of about 2.1.
And this is all because people are working too much?
This is because people aren't having enough kids to support the pensioners.
Well, I
who
get that. I mean,
need to get
and I guess
paid.
we're trying to be delicate about this, but the point is it because they're at the office too much, or?
But then the idea is like if you're a woman that doesn't have kids and is not married, do you not get the 4-day work week?
Good question.
I don't understand how they implement this without
weird
like, this
line.
being
No,
kind of
or
weird, so.
working dads will get
Yeah.
a 4-day work week, for instance, and then they can help out at home, and then maybe the mom can
Yeah.
go back to the office and
I-
work as well, and maybe feel more comfortable having kids.
I do think it's interesting too when they talk about kind of the salary concessions they're giving as well. So maybe you get a shorter work day, though you still come in, for the 5 days. So I guess look, at the end of the day, it looks like it's just kind of flexibility, right? So if you want to
Right.
have a family or you're planning for a family, maybe you have the flexibility to
Yeah, but
work that out.
I think the hard part about a policy like this is it takes so many years to understand if it actually works.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, we'll see.
Well, there's
Got
one
it.
way to know if it works, Tim.
Try it.
Go ahead.
And that's whether you end up with a baby in 9 months.
Guess I got to go. That is going to do it for our cross
What? I mean,
coverage of
come on.
He's cutting straight to the chase.
Somebody had to say it. You guys are too diplomatic.
All right, Tim, take
Bye,
us out.
Tim.
Come on now.
Bye, Nora.
Guys, have a great weekend. We'll see you same time, same place on a Monday. Enjoy a couple days off.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
It is a Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenivek. That's Nora Melinda in for Carol Masser this afternoon. It's a Bloomberg exclusive. It's among the most read stories on the Bloomberg terminal about Apple preparing to finally bring one of its most ambitious projects to market, a series of cellular modem chips that will replace components from the longtime partner and adversary Qualcomm. Mark Gurman was first to report on Apple's 3-year plan to roll out these in-house modem chips, aiming to outdo Qualcomm's technology by 2027. We did see shares of Qualcomm and another supplier, Qorvo, fall after the story was published. We got with us Tom Giles. He's Bloomberg News Senior Executive Editor for Global Technology. He joins us out there from the West Coast. Tom, one thing that we've seen from Apple over the last few years is bringing more and more in-house when it comes to its own production of silicon. Where is it in its ambitions to actually complete this?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the show. It is a big scoop. It is a big development. Apple has been very ambitious in spending a lot of money and time on this project. The thing about catching up with Qualcomm's modems is they're very advanced and they're very good at what they do. This is a mainstay for Qualcomm. So what they produce, what Apple produces, right, will not immediately match what Qualcomm's capabilities in a lot of different areas. So they're going to start small. They're going to start less ambitiously with the lower priced iPhones in 2025. You're going to see them in the SE, which is going to get an upgrade next year. And what Apple really needs to be careful about is ensuring that these modems, which are the key component of the iPhone that connects them with wireless networks, is that they don't drop calls and there's no latency, that there's no notable difference in terms of call quality when you're using the iPhone for telecommunications. That's what they've got to. So they'll start out with the least advanced, and then they'll roll out more advanced versions in the subsequent years, so that by 2027 they'll be able to do something of a fuller, if not complete, swap out of Qualcomm components.
I mean, Apple is one of those companies that really likes to perfect what they do. They test it so many times before they even push it out. So that's a testament to what you just mentioned. But how huge will this really be for Apple if they're able to take over the reins from Qualcomm? Has Qualcomm had a hold on this space?
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Qualcomm is the leader in this area, and they get more than 20% of their revenue from Apple. So it's a big part of what they do. Apple's a major customer, but as you noted, they're also a competitor. And what Apple wants to do is they bringing this chip making in-house so that they can ensure that all of the components are most compatible with their devices, with the applications that are on there, with the software. So they like to bring it in-house. Yes, it's part of like owning your supply chain. We saw during the pandemic that the more control you have over your supply chain, the better off you are. Apple needs to make sure that they're not going to have any disruptions. They want to make sure that that there's not anyone else competing with them for purchasing these components. They want to make sure they're most compatible. They want to make sure that they're energy efficient. And so Apple believes that by bringing it in-house, they will be able to tweak their modems to make them most compatible with their devices, with their software, and ultimately make a better customer experience. But it's been a long time in the making, as Mark points out in the scoop. This is something they've been working on for a very long time. Early versions were too big, they ran too hot, they weren't efficient enough. But they're finally getting to the place where they can start to talk about, hey, we've got a timetable, we're going to start to roll them out. We're much, much more comfortable with how things are going.
Tom, is there a corollary here with what happened over the last decade with Apple moving away from Intel when it came to
Absolutely.
chips in its laptops and other PCs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, under Johnny Strugi, he's one of the top executives. He's the chip guy, if you will, at Apple. He's been really working hard to bring in engineers, including many former Qualcommers. They've set up operations all over the world, including right there in Qualcomm's backyard, right in San Diego. They're getting these tested right now with hundreds of employees of Apple all around the world. And so, yeah, this is very much a corollary to what you saw with Intel. The feeling is we can do this just as well, if not better, by bringing the process in-house. Tim Cook puts a lot of faith in Johnny Strugi. He's the spearhead. He's spearheading this effort. And I think, the more control that Apple has over its supply chain, the more it can bring the chip making, particularly, which are these key brains behind what's all this computing that's happening right in your back pocket. The more they can bring that in-house, the more comfortable they can feel about control of the supply chain and making sure that the iPhone is an optimal experience for the user.
Hey, I know that they mentioned in the story that they won't be using this in their higher end products. They're going to debut it into mid-tier iPhones later next year. Just how important is it that they pull this off?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that they've spent a lot of money on. It's been years in the making. Again, when you're an iPhone user, you've come to expect a certain degree of reliability. You've come to expect that your calls are going to go through. They're not going to get dropped. You're going to have clean connections. There's not going to be a lot of lag time. And so Apple, remember, iPhone accounts for, it's the biggest product for Apple. They make as much revenue from the iPhone as many companies do with their entire product lineup. So there's a lot riding on getting this right. There's a lot riding on ensuring that each new version of the iPhone is measurably better. What Apple doesn't want is for them to introduce a new version of the iPhone and people to say, meh, right? People want to be able to have a measurable improvement with every version of the iPhones. And now the stakes are even higher because they're incorporating artificial intelligence into the iPhone. That's in the latest version of the software, and you're going to see more and more of that. And people are going to be looking to the iPhone to be measurably better with each iteration.
Hey, Tom, we only have 30 seconds left, but as Mark notes in the piece, the part will take away business from Qualcomm, as we've talked about, but it could also eventually affect Qorvo. Apple uses Skyworks and Broadcom for these RF filters. It was interesting, you saw Broadcom gain as much as 4.9% today. Why do we see a reaction like that after a story like this?
Right. Right. As noted, the sense that we have right now, based on our sourcing, is that this will be a replacement for Qualcomm and as well as Qorvo, but we will not see swapping out of Skyworks and other suppliers currently. So that's why you saw a divergence between the reaction.
Very cool stuff. Tom, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Do appreciate it. Tom Giles, Bloomberg News Senior Executive Editor for Global Technology out there on the West Coast. Once again, the story, a Bloomberg exclusive from Mark Gurman, who was the first to report on Apple's 3-year plan to roll out in-house modem chips. To understand.
It's going to be fun.
And it is 4:21 on Wall Street, and we do check the markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. Traders increasing bets on a December Federal Reserve interest rate cut after a mixed November employment report, but Meg Horniman, Chief Investment Officer, Verdens Capital Advisors, says inflation is still a concern.
It doesn't change the fact that the Fed will cut interest rates in December, but it does make 2025 look a little bit less certain, and that's because the inflation continues to be the sticky story there. So whether it's housing, whether you look at the wage number that we got today, services, all of this is still problematic for the Fed, and it's something that they can't control.
And And Horniman there on Bloomberg Business Week also says that could spoil the rate-cutting party next year. And we did have a mixed close for stocks. The Dow finishing down about 0.3%, down by 123. But we did see some record breakers. S&P 500 up 0.2%, 15 points higher, 60.90 at the close. And the Nasdaq up 159 points, 0.8%, 19,860. Yield on the 10-year, 4.14%. Spot gold, $26.32 an ounce, up fractionally. And West Texas crude down 1.7%, $67.15 a barrel. Bitcoin, 101,264, so well above that 100,000 level that some investors eye closely. We're hearing, as we've been talking about, Apple preparing to finally bring a series of cellular modem chips to market that will replace components from Qualcomm. That stock, though, closed slightly lower. Gunman who killed Brian Thompson, CEO of U.S. health insurer United Healthcare, earlier this week, may have fled the city on a bus, according to CNN. And new surveillance footage shows the suspect riding the subway and visiting various establishments in Manhattan. Not clear exactly where he went. Separately, the judge overseeing the trial of Daniel Penny, accused of using a deadly chokehold on a subway passenger, has dismissed the top charge now in that case at the request of prosecutors. And that will allow jurors to consider a lesser count against the man, Daniel Penny, who held Jordan Neely in a chokehold for about 6 minutes on a New York City subway in May of 2023. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Denise Pellegrini, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, Denise, thanks so much. Do appreciate that. Nora, Melinda, one thing you have to know about how we roll here
Tell
at
me.
Bloomberg Business Week is we like to wine and dine.
I love it here.
Okay, you do? Okay, good. That was a quick response. On Fridays, we sometimes get to do that. Celeste Beatty is going to help us do just that. She's founder of Harlem Brewing Company. She's also the first Black woman to own a brewery in the United States, and she's got a brand new cookbook out, Harlem Brew Soul, a beer-infused soul food cookbook. She joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. We're going to talk beer. We're going to talk food. But first, you've got a really cool story that starts with a homebrew kit in a closet. How did it go? Take us into your story.
Well, yeah. So I did start as a home brewer in my studio apartment at the time in Harlem. The home brewing kit was a gift that I didn't use for quite a while, so things didn't turn out that great.
It kind of happens with like these type of gifts, right?
It does. But I wasn't deterred and decided to get another kit and keep trying to brew, and voila.
Okay, so a lot happened in between that and voila.
Lots of beers.
Yeah.
Some trial and error.
Some trial and error.
Absolutely.
What was it? You weren't even like initially attracted to. It wasn't like you had been drinking beer and saw this homebrew kit and went to buy it and thought you could do it yourself. What was the moment where you realized, hey, I actually like doing this?
Cooking.
Okay.
Cooking with beer, cooking with wine. I like to experiment with things. And infusing beer was something I fell in love with early on. Wine and even spirits. It just gave a whole nother layer of flair that I didn't know.
Wait, so the cooking brought you to beer?
Pretty much. I mean, I did try a little bit of beer in college and a few other places. But anyway.
As one does.
But cooking is what really gave me a passion. And then learning about the history.
I mean, what were some of your favorite dishes? You know, of course, maybe in the amateur stage of playing around with this trial and error beer, what were you cooking?
Soups.
Okay.
My initial tool was my mom's soup pot. And I was able to basically do soup and add the beer to the soups that I made. Vegetable soups, stews. It just added so much flavor to it that I'd never experienced before that I fell in love with. And then a few of my friends said, you know, this isn't bad.
I always thought you were supposed to use not good beer to cook. Like the microbrews you kind of leave for drinking. I know this is true with wine. You sort of, use the junky wine to cook.
Well, I think...
what am I getting wrong here?
Junky wine might mean junky food. I don't know. But no. I mean, the essence is always
obviously
there.
I'm not a sommelier.
Yeah, well, at the time that I was cooking with beer, it was your Sam Adams, your Anchor Steams. I was looking at trying to find something.
This was what, the 1990s?
1990s.
Okay.
So
and there wasn't a whole craft brew movement at that point.
There really wasn't exactly. I mean, it wasn't like now 9,500 breweries. I mean, there's so many different amazing beers out there. But at the time, there really weren't that many, and certainly not in a local marketplace.
So how did you really get this off of its feet? I imagine you started out by having your friends try everything, and they were like, we got to take it and show it to other people. Tell me about that origin story.
Yeah, first letting them taste it in the food dishes that I love to make. My spaghetti sauces, my stews, my soups, I would share that. And then when I started actually home brewing, I was able to share those cans and bottles, actually at the time, there were no canners, with my friends, restaurants. Sylvia's Restaurants, that I told the story many times, is one of the restaurants I shared my home brews with, and they were also the first restaurant to give us an order. And that feedback just grew. And the other thing that happened is that the community that became my home, Harlem, the village of Harlem, was going through what some say is a second renaissance. A lot of entrepreneurship, revitalization going on. So a lot of people around me were starting businesses. And I began to get feedback from them and was encouraged after some of the not so great brews got better. They were like, this isn't bad. I think you're onto something here.
So fast forward a couple decades. Here we are.
A couple of decades.
2024.
2025.
You do have cans of beer now.
Yes, we do.
You do have. It's not just bottles. We have some here in the studio, which we are going to talk about in just a few minutes.
Sure.
How do you get to the point where you go from home brewing to actually opening a brewery, the infrastructure involved with that, the investment involved with that? How do you make it into a business?
So there are a couple of ways. One way is to build it from the ground up. Another way is to collaborate with other breweries, and that's what we did. Not enough time here to get into the details of some of the challenges socially and from a perspective from the community standpoint.
We've got
time?
we have
really?
time. We have time. We'd love to hear it.
Well, yeah. So there's a number of ways that you can get there. One is, as I said, contract brewing, collaboration brewing. We took the collaboration brewery route because it was difficult to open up a brewery in the middle of a community, especially a historic community like Harlem. You really want to respect it. You want to be mindful of where you are, many beautiful churches and institutions. So I went the route of home brewing my beer first, and then establishing Harlem Brewing Company, and then going to an amazing brewery in Saratoga Springs, New York, where we canned our first bottle and then eventually canned our recipes.
Is that still, sorry, Nora, go ahead.
I just wanted to talk a bit more about the challenges as we've been discussing. I mean, of course, when we think about beer, I immediately think of white men. It's a white male-dominated space. What is it like being a Black woman in the industry?
It's now it's better. At the time, I would go into places and they thought I was coming there to do a promotion. I could tell them about beer, speak about the ingredients, and talk about beer, but it kind of went over many people's heads. They were like, "What are you talking about? Aren't you here to do a promotion?" But it was tough, not just as a Black woman, but as a woman in general. But over time, as more women through the Pink Boots Society, I could give them a shout out. More and more women have come into the industry, so we have more peers to talk to. So it's gotten a lot better, but I think women only represent about 7% of the brewers, and probably less than 25% of the teams, parts of the teams and staff of breweries.
Were you surprised to find that you are the first Black woman to own a brewery in the U.S.? Like when that happened, were you like, that makes sense or that doesn't make sense?
I said, no way I can be the first Black woman in America to launch a commercial beer. I usually state it that way. But I think because of the complications of our history, there are many other Black women that brewed beer. I mean, you can look through the records during enslavement, prior to enslavement, all over the continent of Africa. There are Black women, Black and brown women that brew beer. So I just think maybe that story hasn't been told, and there is a story that we told through a beer we made to celebrate the life of Patsy Young, who was an enslaved brewer who became free and brewed freely for 14 years in Eastern North Carolina. Whoopi Goldberg actually lended her face to that story, and we launched that beer last year. So that's one of the stories I point to, because that was 1806. So there are women that are unknown, but when you uncover the history and you start talking about those stories, you discover that really pretty much everything except maybe the tech stuff, somebody's done it. So
well, I want to dig back to the food. I'm a foodie. Digging back into this book, Harlem Brew Soul, a beer-infused soul food cookbook. What are some of your favorite dishes? What should we be looking for in this cookbook?
Well, we celebrated our 50th family reunion in North Carolina in July, and there's always a competition of who's going to make the best banana pudding, mac and cheese, what's the dish? And the dish for my family, particularly on the dessert end, is banana pudding. So we make, in the book, there's a recipe that honors my aunt, Betty, which is a brew-nana pudding. So we infuse our Harlem Renaissance wheat beer. It's not a hoppy beer. It's very light on the hops. It has coriander, cumin, grains of paradise, and orange peel. So that type of a beer and a banana pudding infuses those flavors, gives us a nice, subtle flavors of some of the spices in the beer. So that's a brew-nana pudding. And then we have our beer smack and cheese, which we'll be actually serving at a charitable event on 119th Street in Harlem to support the homeless El Refectorio. That dish is a beer mac and cheese dish infused with a beer sauce. So we use one of the beers in the sauce, and we layer that into all of the layers of the mac and cheese.
So I'm listening to this, and we have more time with you. We're gonna do some news and come back in a few minutes. But I'm hearing about this family reunion. And I'm wondering, is it really a competition when it comes to food? Like, are there more than just one? Is there more than one person with a cookbook out? Like, you have the cookbook out. You've been cooking your whole career.
Sounds like she won.
Is there really a competition going on here? You're explaining this food to me, and I'm like, I wouldn't want to go up against this at any family reunion.
Well,
I'm not bringing my.
It's not an official competition, but when the lineup goes on that long table.
Okay, what does it look like?
Oh, the main courses, the side dishes, and the desserts. It becomes a competition. Because everybody knows who made which dish.
I wouldn't want my food next to yours. That's all I'm saying.
It certainly is kind of competitive.
I wouldn't either.
Hey, does every
come to the reunion?
I will gladly do that. Does every recipe in here in this book involve beer?
Yeah, everything from beer cocktails to beer sorbet.
These are all things I don't realize that you can put beer into. Like,
Right.
Absolutely, more than what you can use wine for.
Does the alcohol get cooked off?
Most.
Can I give this stuff to my kids?
Oh well.
Not the beer.
I don't know about that.
Not the beer cocktails, but
well,
maybe the mac and cheese.
You could. I mean, my.
Should I?
She's like, I'm
got
not going
to
to
taste
stop
beer a
you.
little bit growing up, so I think you could. I wouldn't go overboard with it, but there are some kid-friendly dishes in there, I would say, in moderation.
Just got to flip through.
Well, we're gonna talk more beer. Maybe do a little drinking of beer if that's allowed in here in just a few minutes when we come back with Celeste Beatty. She's the founder of Harlem Brewing Company. She's also got a brand new cookbook out. It's called Harlem Brew Soul, a beer-infused soul food cookbook. You're listening to and watching Bloomberg Business Week.
And it is 4:40 on Wall Street. We check the markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. I'm Denise Pellegrini. Stocks finished the U.S. session miss. Here's a theme a lot of investors were keeping an eye on today. U.S. hiring rebounded, but rising unemployment did keep that Fed rate cut or hopes of it alive. Sarah Wolf, senior economist at Morgan Stanley, says today's jobs data really puts the Fed in a predictable place.
I'm looking at all the underlying details, and it's kind of just showing that the economy's in a solid place, and we're not going to see much market moving around this. We're going to look towards the CPI data, but the economy's chugging along. It's in a good place, so we don't need to put on more cuts for next year, and it's not so high that we need to take off cuts as well for December.
And Wolf there on the Bloomberg Surveillance podcast, which you can download wherever you get your podcasts. The Dow closing down about 0.3%, 123 points lower. S&P 500 up 15 at the close. NASDAQ surging 0.8%, better by 159 points. Yield on the 10-year, 4.15%, we'll call it. Spot gold, 2,632 an ounce. That is up slightly. And West Texas crude down about 1.7%, 67.14 a barrel. Bitcoin just above that 100,000 level now, 100,964. Shares of Petco traded 8% higher at the close after it reported third quarter adjusted EBITDA that came in ahead of estimates. DocuSign up 27% after they boosted their outlook. The gunman who killed Brian Thompson, CEO of U.S. health insurer United Healthcare, earlier this week, may have fled the city on a bus, according to police, after visiting various places in Manhattan. And separately, the judge overseeing the trial of Daniel Penny, accused of using a deadly chokehold on Jordan Neely on a New York City subway back in May of 23, has now dismissed the top charge. The top charge has been dismissed. In that case, that is the request of prosecutors. We're going to have more on exactly what's happening there in just a minute. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Denise Pellegrini, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Back over to you.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Denise. I do want to continue on that headline that you mentioned. According to the Associated Press, the judge overseeing the trial of a man accused of using a deadly chokehold on an unruly New York subway passenger dismissed the top charge in the case on Friday at prosecutors' request, allowing jurors to consider a lesser charge count after they deadlocked on whether Daniel Penny was guilty of manslaughter. I'm reading directly from the Associated Press there. I do want to bring in Bloomberg News legal analyst June Grosso, also the host of Bloomberg Law here on Bloomberg Radio. June, perfect guest to have on this because there's some legal intricacies here. What's going on?
So the prosecutors charged Daniel Penny with two crimes: manslaughter, which requires proving that he recklessly caused another person's death and carries up to 15 years, and then what's called a lesser included, criminally negligent homicide, which involves engaging in sort of blameworthy conduct and carries punishments ranging from probation to up to 4 years in prison. So the jury goes out and the judge tells them, you have to first decide on the top charge, the manslaughter charge. You can't talk about the second charge until you come to a decision on the first charge. So they deliberated for over 4 days. They've asked for all kinds of testimony back, they've asked for videos back, and they've asked a lot of questions of the judge about, the charges, how he charged them as far as what's manslaughter, what's negligence, what's justification, what's recklessness, a whole bunch of things. They came back today and they said, Your Honor, we cannot reach a verdict on the top count, which is the manslaughter count. So he sends them back and gives what we call the dynamite charge, which you give to jurors when they say they're deadlocked, and you say, you go back in, talk to each other, and the people who have the minority opinion, keep your mind open to what the other people are saying. When they come back again, they say, no, we can't reach a decision. So the prosecutor then says, makes a motion to remove the top charge, the manslaughter charge, to knock the manslaughter charge out and just have them deliberate on the criminally negligent homicide charge. And the judge said he would do that. And apparently I read that one of the jurors was shaking his head back and forth because the judge said, you'll come back on Monday and you'll start deliberating about the criminally negligent. So the defense fought that. They didn't want this to happen. They want the jury to go in there and come to a decision based on what they have in front of them. This way the prosecution has an advantage. The prosecution charged 2, and when they saw things weren't going well, they dropped 1. So the defense wanted a mistrial.
Hey, June, was this a surprise at all, or was this expected?
Was the mistrial a surprise? I mean, which part of it?
Correct, yes, this trial.
The once the jury was out 3 days, it seemed like they were deadlocked. So, once you have a jury out for 3 days and once you saw that they're really sort of paying attention, they're asking the right questions, they're looking at the videos, you could sort of see where they were in the case and how they were struggling. So once that happened, this morning I figured they would be deadlocked. This is a different thing. Usually, their jury is deadlocked, and then it's basically a win for the defense. The jury gets to go, a mistrial is declared, and they get to start again if the prosecution decides to bring the charges again. So it wasn't a surprise once we knew that the jury was deadlocked. The jury was, deliberating so long, but it's a little bit of a surprise that the judge allowed the prosecution to just drop the top charge.
June, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks so much for bringing us this update. That's Bloomberg News legal analyst June Grosso joining us on the phone from New York City. June, also the host of Bloomberg Law on Bloomberg Radio. I do want to get right back to Celeste Beatty. She's founder of Harlem Brewing Company. She is the first black woman to own a brewery in the United States, but you put it a different way. How did you describe it?
I would just say at the time, as we know.
As we know.
Yeah.
As we know.
I mean, from the history that I've learned about, there are black women pretty much in every family I know that brewed beer, wine, sometimes moonshine, and it's in our history books.
She's also the author of a new cookbook, Harlem Brew Soul, a beer-infused soul food cookbook. I promised that we would crack a can.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do it. Let's
do
brew it.
Okay,
Let's
so we're
brew
doing
it.
Brew it. I like
Let's
that.
do
This is Harlem IPA.
125th Street.
125th Street IPA.
A beautiful can.
Yeah.
Let's hear it. Ooh, yeah. That's the sound you want to hear.
That must have been nice for people on
Wait
radio.
a minute. Where's my
you guys
beer?
hear that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I took a sip.
Look at us being selfish.
There's some up there. I don't want you to get up and move away from the microphone. We were talking a little earlier, and can you talk a little about the recipe for this, and also the idea that there are these sort of trends within the beer industry? IPAs were huge for so many years, then everybody did an IPA, and then they kind of went out of style, and then farmhouse saisons. What are people loving right now?
Sounds like you know a little bit about beer.
A little bit, yeah.
Well, IPAs are still very
sip some
popular.
beers.
IPAs are still very popular.
Okay.
This is on the hazy side, a New England style IPA. It has about 5 different varieties of hops. If you're familiar with hops and mosaic hops.
Break that down for me.
Hops.
Be a non-beer drinker. Break that down for me.
It's a flower.
Okay.
It has bittering facets to it. It also has some citrus, some spice. It layers in flavor.
Sounds great.
In the IPAs, it gives it a very deep, sometimes very juicy, citrusy, piney flavor and aroma. So they're flavoring hops, and they're also bittering hops that give hops sort of the balance of sweetness in the malt. That's kind of the role that it plays. I love growing hops. They're amazing. They're so many different uses beyond beer, and they're great to grow. They're perennials. But it's a beautiful sort of pine cone-shaped flower that grows from April through August. Growth period takes place during that time. Harvest takes place during the fall.
So we have the beer, we have the cookbook.
Yes.
What is the next chapter? I mean, I feel like you've done it all, honestly, but
hardly.
As we're going into 2025, what are you thinking in terms of business expansion?
Definitely thinking about more how do we support our communities. We have Rocky Mount, North Carolina. We're working on a project there that involves brewing education, working with black and brown farmers in eastern North Carolina to grow grains, to get more engaged in the industry. We have our project in Brixton in the UK. That's about bonds across the pond. How do we sort of connect common threads and common cultures around beer? And got a couple of projects we're working on. Our project in Rocky Mount, and then working on something in Harlem, sort of full circle from where we started with Bloomberg.
10 seconds. Where can people buy the beer, and where is it distributed?
The beer can be purchased locally at Craft and Carry, Whole Foods, Melba's Restaurant, Boulevard Bistro, Total Wine and More. What was the rest of it?
Distribution, outside of New York City?
Distribution primarily in the Northeast, also in the Southeast, and in the UK.
So it can be bought many, many different places.
Many places. You can order it through Uber Eats and things of that nature as well.
Celeste Beatty, she is the founder of Harlem Brewing Company, the new cookbook, Harlem Brew Soul, a beer-infused soul food cookbook. This is Bloomberg.
listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenovec. That is Norma Linda in for Carol Nasser this afternoon. Well, in San Francisco, Waymos are becoming increasingly commonplace, and that's actually provoking some attacks on cars. So writes Ellen Hewitt. She's tech features writer for Bloomberg News. She joins us from our San Francisco bureau. Ellen, I'm trying not to bore everybody with my experience in San Francisco a few weeks ago when I took my first Waymo, but it blew my mind. It was so cool. I didn't realize when I've seen them there, many visits over the past few years, but I knew you had to be there was like a waiting list, and now recently they've expanded this and just allowed anyone to do it. So I just downloaded the app on the recommendation of a friend. I took a Waymo. I truly feel like my life has changed because I've been in a driverless car. You're laughing at me because you're out in San Francisco and you've been doing this for years. But not everybody likes these things. They're getting attacked. What's going on?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'll share with you, like, yeah, it's cool to realize that, 10 years ago, I remember taking a press ride with, I think it was Waymo also, in a car that really followed, it was almost more like an amusement park ride because it followed like a prearranged track, and like, it's just really awesome to see how cool and how much the technology has advanced in the last few years. And yes, in San Francisco, I would say for some people, a Waymo, not that novel anymore, just something that you could call, something that you might see on the street. But you're right, there have also been rare, but obviously usually pretty notable attacks on Waymos where people have been caught on video stomping on the windshields or tagging the cars. There was a car that had got tagged and vandalized during the Dodgers parade because Waymo's now available in LA as well. I just thought it'd be interesting to call up a few experts and try to understand, like, what is it about our human nature that makes us want to attack a robot car?
So, Ellen, what types of customers go to Waymo? I am so curious. Here in New York, I've never seen one. But, I mean, you could go Uber, you can go Lyft. I imagine when you're there in San Francisco, you could just go to the app and choose which one. Is it the cheaper option?
I think for now, it's probably about the same price-wise. I imagine that in the future, as these things shift, that, that might change. And yeah, more and more Americans are going to get the chance to use a Waymo. Waymo announced yesterday that they have plans to expand to Miami, I believe in 2026. Next year, they're already planning to expand to Austin and Atlanta. That's actually through a partnership with Uber. So that might be something that people do is they open their Uber app and then they actually just call a Waymo car. I think the people who use it around San Francisco, for a while it was just on a wait list. Now it's available to anyone who might want to download the Waymo app and use it to call a car. It only, you have to stay in San Francisco. So, often I'm trying to cross the bay to go to Oakland. You can't take a Waymo across the Bay Bridge yet.
So I'm curious, what are experts saying is the reason that people are attacking these cars? What have you been hearing?
I mean, it's a mix of things. I spoke to some professors who have studied anti-robot violence. I talked to a law professor who studies robot ethics. I think, a lot of it's obviously speculation. Some of these cases, are happening for a variety of reasons. But, sometimes people see the cars as a symbol of advancements in technology that they don't feel comfortable with. So in some sense, it reminded me also of the anti-Google bus protests that were happening in San Francisco a decade ago. For a while, the Google commuter buses had become the symbol of gentrification from technology and the tech industry in San Francisco, and people were protesting against these buses. They were blockading them so that they couldn't move, and in some cases even breaking their windows or throwing things at them. And this really reminded me, this is kind of like the 2024 version of the Google bus. I think people see the car. It's very visible and notable, obviously, because it doesn't look like other cars. It doesn't have a driver. And people are reacting strongly to it, sometimes out of anger.
Rage against robots. You talked to a professor who studies rage against robots?
Yes, I think she has been studying robot sort of the way that people react to robots and new technology for a long time. And, obviously there are robots in many forms. Like when I called her, she was talking about how she's on a campus in Wisconsin, and she said that a lot of students are ordering food delivery, and the food delivery comes in those little robots that, ride along the sidewalk.
Well, those are annoying.
Those, yeah.
So I understand the rage there.
There are obviously serious reasons that people might feel anger toward like an AI-powered car. They might feel that it's taking away jobs from drivers. They might feel that it's surveilling, or there are good. Some of these cars have been involved in very serious accidents in San Francisco. Although in general, I think people also think of them as like cautious and safe drivers. So anyway, people have good reasons to sometimes be angry toward these cars. But what these experts I talked to also brought up this interesting idea, which is that people just feel emotionally unsettled by the presence of a new entity that isn't just an unthinking machine. You look at one of these cars and you realize, like, it is